The research vessel Atlantic Pioneer had been at sea for 37 days when Nathan Cole first saw something strange on the sonar screen. He was a marine archaeologist with 20 years of experience, and he had seen many unusual things on the ocean floor: old shipwrecks, underwater mountains, strange rock formations. But he had never seen anything like this. The object was huge. According to the readings, it was more than 800 meters long. It sat at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the deepest part of the ocean, buried under thousands of years of sediment. At first, Nathan thought the equipment was broken. He called his assistant, Katie Woods, to check the systems. Katie was young, only 26 years old, but she was one of the smartest people Nathan had ever worked with. She ran the diagnostics 3 times and shook her head. "The equipment is fine," she said. "Whatever that thing is, it's real." Nathan stared at the screen for a long time. The shape was too regular to be natural. It had smooth lines and sharp angles. It looked almost like a building, or perhaps a vehicle. But that was impossible. No human had ever built anything that deep underwater. No human could. He made a decision that would change the world. He called the government. Within a week, the small research vessel was surrounded by Navy ships. Commander Eric Mason arrived on a helicopter, wearing a serious expression that never seemed to leave his face. He was a tall man with gray hair and cold blue eyes. He did not smile when he shook Nathan's hand. "Show me what you found," he said. Nathan showed him the sonar images. He showed him the data readings. He showed him the energy signature that the object was somehow still producing after thousands of years underwater. Commander Mason's face grew more serious with each piece of information. "We need to keep this quiet," Mason said. "No one can know about this until we understand what we're dealing with." More specialists arrived over the following days. Laura Bennett came from a university in California. She was a xenobiologist, a scientist who studied the possibility of alien life. She had spent her entire career being laughed at by other scientists who thought her work was science fiction. Now, looking at the data from the ocean floor, she was not laughing. Her hands were shaking. Michelle Grant arrived next. She was a linguist who worked for the government, breaking codes and translating ancient languages. She was quiet and thoughtful, with dark hair and glasses that she constantly pushed up her nose. She did not say much, but when she spoke, everyone listened. Daniel Price was the last to join the team. He was an engineer, a practical man who solved problems with his hands. He looked at the technical readings and whistled softly. "Whatever this thing is made of," he said, "it's not anything we have on Earth. These materials don't exist in our periodic table." The team worked together to plan the first dive. They would send a small submersible down to the ocean floor to get a closer look. Nathan would lead the mission, with Laura and Katie joining him. The others would watch from the surface through cameras mounted on the submersible. The dive took hours. The Mariana Trench was nearly 11 kilometers deep, a place of crushing pressure and complete darkness. The submersible moved slowly, its lights cutting through the black water like tiny stars. Katie watched the depth meter climb higher and higher. 10,000 meters, 10,500, 11,000. "There," Nathan said, pointing at the viewing window. The lights of the submersible fell upon something that should not exist. It was a ship. Not a boat or a submarine, but a spacecraft. The hull was made of a dark metal that seemed to absorb light. Strange symbols were carved into the surface, forming patterns that looked almost like writing. The design was elegant and flowing, completely unlike anything humans had ever created. Katie felt tears forming in her eyes. She had dreamed of this moment her entire life. She had grown up watching science fiction movies and reading books about aliens. She had always believed that humans were not alone in the universe. Now, she had proof. "Are you seeing this?" Nathan asked into the radio. Commander Mason's voice crackled through the speaker. "We see it. Can you get closer?" The submersible moved forward, its lights revealing more of the ancient ship. There were no visible weapons, no damage from battle. The craft looked almost peaceful, like it had simply gone to sleep at the bottom of the ocean. Laura pressed her face against the viewing window. "Look at the design," she whispered. "It's beautiful." Whoever built this, they were artists as well as engineers. They circled the ship slowly, recording everything. The vessel was shaped like a long oval, with smooth curves and no sharp edges. There were what appeared to be windows along the sides, though they were dark and empty. At the rear, 3 large openings suggested some kind of engine system. "How long has it been down here?" Katie asked. Nathan checked his instruments. "Based on the sediment buildup, I would guess at least 9,000 years. Maybe longer. 9,000 years." Katie tried to imagine it. When this ship sank, humans were just learning to farm. They were living in small villages, using stone tools. They had no idea that somewhere above them, beings from another world were falling into the ocean. The submersible's lights found something else. An opening in the hull. It looked like a door or an airlock, slightly open as if inviting them inside. "I see an entry point," Nathan reported. "But we're not equipped to go inside today. We need to return to the surface and prepare a proper expedition." The journey back up was quiet. Each person was lost in their own thoughts. They had just made the greatest discovery in human history. Nothing would ever be the same. When Nathan climbed out of the submersible, Commander Mason was waiting for him. The military man's face was still serious, but there was something new in his eyes. Something that might have been wonder. "What do we do now?" Mason asked. Nathan looked up at the sky, thinking about how many stars were up there, how many worlds, how many civilizations they had never known about. He thought about the ship sitting in the darkness below, holding secrets that humanity had waited thousands of years to learn. "Now," Nathan said, "we go inside." It took 3 months to build the underwater research station. Daniel Price designed it himself, working day and night to create something that could survive the crushing pressure of the deep ocean. The station sat on the seafloor like a metal bubble, connected to the surface by a long cable that carried power, air, and communication signals. Nathan Cole was the first to step inside the finished station. He looked through the thick windows at the alien ship sitting in the darkness just 100 meters away. After all this time, it still took his breath away. The team gathered for their first meeting inside the station. Laura Bennett had brought samples of the sediment around the ship. Michelle Grant had photographs of the strange symbols on the hull. Katie Woods had prepared detailed maps of the exterior. Commander Mason watched them all with his usual serious expression. "We've studied the outside long enough," Nathan said. "It's time to go in." Daniel had built a special vehicle for the job. It was small enough to fit through the opening in the hull, but strong enough to protect its passengers from whatever might be inside. Nathan, Laura, and Katie would make the first entry. Michelle would watch through cameras and begin analyzing any writing they found. The short journey to the ship felt like the longest of Nathan's life. The vehicle's lights illuminated the dark hull as they approached the opening. Up close, they could see that the door was indeed slightly open, as if someone had left it that way on purpose. Daniel's voice came through the radio. "The materials around the door show no sign of damage or decay. Whatever this ship is made of, it doesn't rust or break down. It's been perfectly preserved." Laura touched the edge of the doorway with her gloved hand. "It feels warm," she said with surprise. "There's still some kind of energy running through the hull." They pushed the door open wider and moved inside. The vehicle's lights revealed a corridor that stretched into darkness. The walls were smooth and pale, made of a material that looked almost like white stone. Strange patterns were carved into the surface, flowing lines that might have been decoration or writing or something else entirely. "There's atmosphere in here," Katie reported, checking her instruments. "Oxygen, nitrogen, and some trace gases I don't recognize. It's breathable, but stale. Very stale." Nathan made a decision. He reached up and removed his helmet. The air smelled old and dusty, like a room that had been sealed for centuries. But he could breathe. He was breathing alien air, inside an alien ship, at the bottom of the ocean. The thought made him dizzy. They moved deeper into the ship. The corridor opened into a larger chamber filled with strange objects. There were tables and chairs, sized for beings slightly taller than humans. There were screens on the walls, dark and silent. There were containers of various sizes, some transparent and some solid. Laura approached one of the transparent containers and gasped. Inside was a specimen. A creature unlike anything on Earth. It had 6 legs and 2 large eyes. And it was preserved perfectly, as if it had died yesterday instead of thousands of years ago. They were scientists, Laura whispered. They collected specimens from different worlds. This ship was an exploration vessel. They found more containers as they explored. Plants with blue leaves. Insects with crystalline wings. Fish with multiple heads. The aliens had traveled to many worlds and gathered samples from each one. And at some point, they had visited Earth. Katie found the proof in a side room. A small container held samples of ancient Earth life. Primitive fish, early plants, tiny creatures that had lived in the oceans millions of years ago. The aliens had been watching Earth for a very long time. The team pressed forward and found the command center. It was a large circular room with a high ceiling and a huge window that looked out into the darkness. Chairs were arranged in a circle around a central platform, and each chair was occupied. Nathan stopped walking. His heart pounded in his chest as he looked at the bodies. They were tall and thin, with pale skin and elongated skulls. They had 4 fingers on each hand, and 2 large eyes that were now closed forever. They wore simple clothing, dark robes that covered most of their bodies. They sat peacefully in their chairs, hands folded in their laps, as if they had simply fallen asleep. They didn't die in pain, Laura said softly. Look at their faces. They're calm. They chose this. There were 12 of them in total. 12 beings who had come from the stars and ended their journey at the bottom of Earth's ocean. Nathan wondered who they were, what their names had been, what they had hoped to find. Michelle's voice came through the radio. I can see the writing on the walls from your cameras. It's definitely a language. Give me time. And I think I can figure it out. Katie moved carefully around the room, recording everything. Her foot touched something on the floor, and suddenly the room came alive. Lights flickered on the ceiling. The screens on the walls began to glow. The central platform hummed with energy. What did you do? Nathan asked. I don't know, Katie said. I just touched this panel on the floor. A hologram appeared above the central platform. It showed a star map, thousands of points of light connected by thin lines. One of the points was highlighted in red. It took Nathan a moment to realize that he was looking at Earth's sun. The hologram changed. Now it showed moving images, like a video recording. There were more of the tall beings, moving through cities of impossible beauty. There were ships like this one, flying between worlds. There was an empire that stretched across the galaxy, and then there was darkness. The images showed something massive and terrible moving between the stars. It swallowed planets. It consumed suns. It destroyed everything it touched. The beautiful cities burned. The ships fled. The empire fell. The hologram ended. The room fell silent. Nathan looked at the bodies in their chairs. He looked at the frozen fear on their dead faces. Whatever had destroyed their civilization, these beings had been running from it. They had come to Earth, to the bottom of the ocean, hoping to hide. They were trying to warn us, Laura said. Nathan nodded slowly. And we need to find out what they were warning us about. Michelle Grant had not slept in 4 days. Her eyes were red and tired, but she could not stop working. The alien language was unlike anything she had ever seen. But slowly, piece by piece, she was learning to read it. The symbols on the walls of the ship were not just decoration. They were records, histories, warnings. And Michelle was the first human to understand them. She worked in a small room in the underwater station, surrounded by screens showing photographs of the alien writing. Katie Woods brought her coffee and food, which Michelle often forgot to eat. Nathan Cole checked on her every few hours, asking if she had made progress. On the 5th day, Michelle called everyone together. Her hands were shaking as she stood in front of the team. She had discovered something, and she was afraid to share it. I've translated enough to understand who they were, she began. They called themselves the Valorans. They were an ancient civilization, much older than humanity. Their empire lasted for over 2 million years. 2 million years. Nathan tried to understand that number. Human civilization was only a few thousand years old. These beings had built an empire that lasted 1,000 times longer. They were peaceful explorers, Michelle continued. They traveled between stars, studying other species, collecting knowledge. They believed that understanding the universe was the highest goal any civilization could have. What happened to them? Laura asked. Michelle's face grew dark. They discovered something. Something terrible. They called it the silence. She pressed a button, and the hologram system they had recovered from the ship came to life. It showed the images they had seen before. The darkness moving between stars, consuming everything in its path. The silence is not a species, Michelle explained. It's more like a force of nature. It's a collective intelligence. Billions of minds working together as one. It travels through space, looking for life, and when it finds life, it absorbs it. Absorbs it? Commander Mason asked. What does that mean? It means exactly what it sounds like. The silence doesn't just kill. It takes. It adds every mind it finds to itself. Every memory, every thought, every piece of knowledge becomes part of the silence. The civilizations it consumes don't die. They become part of something else. Something that has no room for individuality or freedom. The room was quiet. Everyone was thinking about what that would mean for humanity. To lose not just their lives, but their very selves. To become part of a vast, cold intelligence that cared nothing for human hopes or dreams. The Valorans tried to fight, Michelle said. They had 2 million years of technology. They had weapons we can't even imagine. They built defenses around their worlds. They prepared for war. And they lost, Nathan said quietly. They lost in less than 100 years. The silence was too vast, too powerful, too patient. It simply waited for the Valorans to make mistakes. And then it struck. World after world fell. Billions of minds were absorbed. The greatest civilization the galaxy had ever seen was destroyed. Michelle changed the hologram. Now it showed this ship, the one sitting at the bottom of the ocean. This vessel was one of the last. It carried survivors, refugees who were looking for a place to hide. They found Earth. They saw that life here was young and primitive. They hoped the silence would ignore such a small, unimportant world. But why sink to the bottom of the ocean? Katie asked. Why not stay on the surface? Why not try to contact the humans who were alive back then? Because they were not just hiding. They were leaving a gift. Michelle smiled sadly. They knew they were going to die. Their bodies were failing from radiation exposure. They had been too close to a weapon the silence used against their homeworld, so they made a choice. They would hide their ship somewhere safe. Somewhere it would be preserved for thousands of years, and they would fill it with everything they knew. She gestured at the walls around them. This ship is a library. It contains the complete knowledge of the Valoran civilization. Science, history, technology, art. Everything they learned in 2 million years of existence is stored here, and they left it for whoever came after them. They left it for us, Laura said. Yes, they left it for humanity. Their final gift to a species they would never meet. Nathan felt a weight settling on his shoulders. The Valorans had given humanity an incredible treasure, but they had also given them a burden. They had warned them about the silence, which meant the silence was still out there. Still hungry. Still looking for new minds to absorb. Is there anything about when the silence might reach Earth? Commander Mason asked. His voice was steady, but Nathan could see fear in his eyes. Michelle nodded slowly. The Valorans calculated its movement. They predicted that the silence would reach this region of space approximately 10,000 years after they landed on Earth. And how long ago did they land? According to my analysis of the sediment and the ship's own records, they crashed here about 9,500 years ago. The room fell silent again. Katie was the first to do the math. That means we have 500 years, she said. 500 years before it comes for us. 500 years, Nathan repeated. That's 20 generations. That's time to prepare, time to build, time to do what the Valorans couldn't do. Commander Mason shook his head. The Valorans had millions of years of technology. We've only had a few centuries of science. How can we possibly succeed where they failed? It was Laura who answered. She had been quiet for a long time, thinking about everything she had learned about the alien biology. Now she spoke with a strange certainty in her voice. Because we're different, she said. The Valorans were specialists. They evolved for stability, for patience, for long-term planning. But humans are generalists. We adapt. We change. We improvise. We do things that should be impossible because we're too stubborn to accept limits. She looked around at the faces of her team. The Valorans gave us their knowledge. But they also gave us something else. They gave us hope. They believed that a younger, stranger, more chaotic species might find a way to win where they could not. Nathan felt something shift inside him. Fear was still there, but now it was mixed with determination. Humanity had 500 years, and the knowledge of an ancient civilization. It was not much, but it was enough to start. Then we need to get to work, he said. We have a species to save. The world changed faster than anyone expected. When the governments of Earth finally shared the truth about the alien ship, there was panic at first. People were afraid. They were angry. They demanded answers that no one could give. But then something remarkable happened. Humanity stopped fighting itself. For the first time in history, nations put aside their differences. Old enemies became allies. Resources that had been wasted on wars were redirected to a single purpose: survival. The Global Defense Initiative was formed, a unified organization that brought together scientists, engineers, soldiers, and leaders from every country on the planet. Nathan Cole was asked to lead the scientific division. He accepted, even though he knew it would consume the rest of his life. There was no time for anything else now. Every day that passed brought the silence one day closer. The Valoran technology was studied with desperate intensity. Teams of researchers worked around the clock, trying to understand materials that should not exist and machines that broke the laws of physics. Progress was slow at first. The alien science was so advanced that it seemed like magic. But humans were stubborn creatures. They refused to give up. Laura Bennett made the first major breakthrough. She had been studying the Valoran biology, trying to understand why such an advanced species had failed to defeat the silence. What she discovered surprised everyone. The Valorans were nearly perfect, she explained at a global conference. Their bodies were optimized for efficiency. Their minds were focused and disciplined. They had almost no genetic variation within their population. They were exactly what they needed to be, and nothing more. That sounds like a strength, one of the other scientists said. It was a strength for building an empire, but it was a weakness for fighting the silence. The Valorans could not adapt quickly. They could not change their strategies on the fly. They could not think in unexpected ways. The silence learned their patterns and used those patterns against them. Laura smiled. Humans are different. Our DNA is messy. Our minds are chaotic. We argue with each other constantly. We have a million different ways of thinking about the same problem. To the Valorans, we would have looked primitive and disorganized. But that chaos is our greatest weapon. The research accelerated. Human scientists did not just copy Valoran technology. They improved it. They combined alien ideas with human creativity and found solutions that the Valorans had never imagined. What should have taken centuries was accomplished in decades. Daniel Price led the engineering efforts. He was no longer a young man, but he worked harder than ever, knowing that he was building the foundation for humanity's future. Under his direction, the first human starships were constructed in orbit around Earth. They were not beautiful like Valoran vessels. They were rough and practical, built to survive damage and be repaired quickly. They had thick armor and powerful weapons and engines that could outrun almost anything. They were ugly and stubborn, and incredibly effective. They were human. Katie Woods, now in her 40s, commanded the first test flight beyond the solar system. She remembered being a young research assistant, standing in the underwater station, dreaming of the stars. Now she was flying among them. "Neptune Control, this is Pioneer 1, she reported, her voice steady. "We have successfully completed our first faster-than-light jump. All systems are functioning normally. The stars are beautiful out here." The message took 8 hours to reach Earth. When it arrived, people celebrated in the streets. Humanity was no longer trapped on a single world. They had become a spacefaring species. Michelle Grant continued her work translating the Velaran archives. She was an old woman now, her hair white and her hands unsteady, but her mind was still sharp. Every day brought new discoveries. She found records of other species that had fought the silence. She found weapons that had been tried and failed. And she found one crucial piece of information that changed everything. "The silence has a weakness," she announced. "The Valorans never exploited it because they didn't understand it. But we might." The weakness was unpredictability. The silence absorbed minds and used their knowledge to predict behavior. It had consumed thousands of civilizations and learned all of their patterns. It could anticipate almost any strategy because it had seen every strategy before. But it had never seen humans. Nathan Cole, now an old man, listened to Michelle's discovery and felt hope for the first time in years. Humanity's chaos, their inability to agree on anything, their constant arguing and debating and trying new approaches. These things that had always seemed like weaknesses might be exactly what they needed. "The silence expects order," he said. "It expects logic. It expects civilizations that behave in predictable ways. What will it do when it meets a species that can't even predict itself?" The Global Defense Initiative changed its strategy. Instead of trying to create a unified military force, they encouraged diversity. Different nations developed different approaches. Different commanders used different tactics. The human fleet became a collection of wildly varied ships and crews, each one unique. The original research team did not live to see the final battle. Nathan died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 92. Surrounded by his family, Laura passed away 2 years later, still working in her laboratory until the very end. Michelle lived the longest, reaching 103, her mind active until her last breath. Katie Woods died on a distant world, commanding a colony ship that was establishing humanity's furthest outpost. Her last words were transmitted back to Earth and became famous. "We're planting seeds for trees we'll never see." But that's what humans do. Daniel Price was the last of the original team to go. On his deathbed, he was visited by a young engineer named Ryan Harris, the grandson of Katie Woods. Daniel looked at the young man and smiled. "We gave you everything we could," Daniel said. "The rest is up to you. Make us proud." Ryan promised that he would. He had grown up hearing stories about his grandmother and her friends, about the ship they found and the warning they uncovered. Now it was his generation's turn to face the darkness. 300 years had passed since the discovery. Humanity had spread across 100 star systems. They had built fleets and weapons and defenses. They had trained soldiers and commanders and strategists. They were as ready as they would ever be. And in the darkness between stars, the silence was coming. The first warning came from a listening post at the edge of human space. A young officer named Maya Chen was working the night shift when her screens suddenly went dark. One moment, there were thousands of stars visible on her sensors. The next moment, they were gone, swallowed by something vast and terrible. She sent the emergency signal immediately. "All stations, this is Outpost 7. The silence has arrived. Repeat, the silence has arrived." The message spread across human space at the speed of light. On 100 worlds, alarms began to sound. Soldiers ran to their ships. Civilians hurried to evacuation shelters. Centuries of preparation had led to this moment. Ryan Harris was 60 years old now, an admiral in command of the First Fleet. He had spent his entire life training for this battle, knowing it would come, dreaming about it, fearing it. Now the fear was gone. There was only cold determination. "All ships, report to battle stations," he ordered. "We defend at Proxima." The Battle of Proxima Centauri would be remembered for as long as humans existed. 300 warships gathered in orbit around the star, forming a defensive line against the approaching darkness. They were crewed by men and women from every nation on Earth. United by a common purpose, the silence arrived like a wave of shadows. It was enormous, stretching across millions of kilometers of space, darker than the void itself. It moved with terrible purpose, its countless absorbed minds working together as one. It had destroyed thousands of civilizations. It had consumed trillions of beings. It expected this battle to be like all the others. A brief resistance, followed by inevitable defeat, followed by absorption into the greater whole. It was wrong. The human fleet attacked with no coherent strategy. Each ship fought in its own way, using tactics that its commanders had invented themselves. Some charged directly at the enemy, others held back and fired from a distance. Some worked in coordinated groups, others fought alone, dancing through the chaos like leaves in a storm. The silence had expected order, it had expected predictability. Instead, it found chaos. Its ancient intelligence tried to analyze the human tactics, looking for patterns it could exploit. But there were no patterns. Every ship was different. Every commander was different. Every attack came from an unexpected angle. For the first time in millions of years, the silence hesitated. Admiral Harris saw the moment of confusion and pressed the attack. All ships, full assault. Don't give it time to think. The human fleet surged forward. Weapons designed from Veleron knowledge and human creativity tore into the darkness. The silence screamed on every frequency, a sound of rage and pain that echoed across the stars. The battle lasted for 18 hours. Human ships were destroyed by the dozens. Brave men and women gave their lives to buy seconds of advantage. The silence fought back with terrible power, absorbing entire crews and adding their minds to its own. But it was losing. Slowly, impossibly. The humans were winning. Their unpredictable tactics confused the ancient intelligence. Their stubborn refusal to retreat frustrated its strategies. Their willingness to sacrifice themselves for each other created openings that the silence could not anticipate. When dawn came over Proxima, the silence withdrew. It was not defeated, but it was wounded. For the first time in its existence, it had been driven back. The celebration was brief. Everyone knew the battle was not over. The silence would return, stronger and more cautious. The war would continue for years, perhaps decades. Many more would die before the end, but hope had been born. Over the following decades, humanity learned to fight the silence more effectively. They developed new weapons and new tactics. They struck at its edges, harassing and weakening it. They rescued survivors from worlds it had consumed, freeing minds that had been trapped for millennia. The war was brutal and costly. Entire colonies were lost. Billions of humans died. There were moments when it seemed like all was lost, when the silence pushed deep into human space and threatened Earth itself. But humanity refused to give up. The final battle came 40 years after Proxima. The silence had been driven back, weakened by countless defeats. It retreated to its core, a vast concentration of absorbed minds at the center of a dead galaxy. Admiral Harris was 98 years old now, his body frail but his mind still sharp. He commanded the assault fleet from his flagship, the vessel named Remembrance, in honor of all those who had died. "Today, we end this," he said to his crew. "Today, we finish what our ancestors started." The human fleet was larger now, thousands of ships from 100 worlds. They carried a weapon that had taken decades to develop, based on the deepest secrets of the Valoran archives. It was designed to do something that should have been impossible, to break the silence apart, to free the minds it had absorbed. The battle was unlike anything that had come before. The silence fought with desperate fury, knowing that this was its final stand. Ships exploded in blinding flashes of light. The darkness swirled and churned like a living storm. Ryan Harris guided his ship to the heart of the enemy. He thought about his grandmother, Katie Woods, who had dreamed of the stars. He thought about Nathan Cole and Laura Bennett and all the others who had found the ship and given humanity a chance. He thought about the Valorans, who had died hoping that someone would carry on their fight. "This is for all of you," he whispered. He activated the weapon. Light erupted from the center of the silence. It spread outward in a wave, touching every absorbed mind, breaking the chains that held them together. The ancient intelligence screamed one final time, and then it was gone. In its place were ghosts. Billions of minds, freed at last, glowing briefly in the darkness before fading away. Among them were the Valorans, their consciousnesses finally released from the prison that had held them for millions of years. They reached out to the human ships with something that felt like gratitude. "Thank you," they seemed to say. "Thank you for finishing what we could not." And then they were gone, at peace at last. Admiral Harris watched the light fade. Tears streamed down his wrinkled face. The war was over. The silence was destroyed. Humanity had won. In the years that followed, other species emerged from hiding. They had been watching, waiting, afraid to hope. When they learned that the silence was truly gone, they came to meet the strange, chaotic, stubborn species that had done the impossible. Humanity welcomed them with open arms. Treaties were signed. Knowledge was shared. A new era began, an age of cooperation and exploration that the Valorans would have been proud to see. On Earth, a memorial was built at the site where the Atlantic Pioneer had first detected the alien ship. It bore the names of everyone who had fought and died in the war against the silence. At the center stood statues of Nathan Cole, Laura Bennett, Michelle Grant, Daniel Price, and Katie Woods, the 5 ordinary humans who had started it all. Below the statues, carved in stone, were words that captured everything humanity had learned. "We are small, we are young, we are chaotic and messy and strange. But we do not give up. We do not surrender. And when we stand together, nothing in the universe can stop us." The stars shone bright above the memorial, no longer hiding terrors in the darkness. The universe was open now, waiting to be explored. And humanity, stubborn and wonderful humanity, was ready.